Every day. Without thinking about it. You probably touch China hundreds of times. When you silence your phone in the morning. When you make coffee. When you open your laptop. Or even when you switch on a light. Turn almost any everyday object over. And you'll probably find the same 3 words. Made in China. It's one of the most familiar labels on Earth. Yet just 50 years ago, those words meant almost nothing to the rest of the world. In the 1970s, China wasn't an economic superpower. It wasn't the world's factory. It wasn't competing with America, Japan, or Western Europe. In fact, many economists believed China would remain a poor agricultural country for decades. Nothing about its future looked extraordinary. And that's what makes this story so unbelievable. Because 1 generation later, China had built the world's largest manufacturing economy, the world's largest high-speed rail network, some of the busiest ports on Earth, and had lifted hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty, according to the World Bank. How does a country change that dramatically? In a single lifetime? Was it cheap labor? A massive population? Strict government planning? Or have we been asking the wrong question all along? Because the rail story doesn't begin inside a factory. Begins inside a meeting room. Beijing. December 1978. The city carried on as usual. Buses rolled through the streets. Markets opened before sunrise. Factory whistles echoed across neighborhoods. For ordinary people, it was just another cold winter morning. But behind closed doors, a handful of leaders were discussing a question that had no easy answer. China had spent years trying to rebuild its economy. Some policies had achieved important goals. Others had left the country struggling with low productivity and widespread poverty. The country couldn't continue exactly as before. But changing the future of nearly 1 billion people wasn't something anyone could simply guess. There was no instruction manual, no guarantee of success, only a different way of thinking. Instead of changing the entire country at once, why not test new ideas first? If they worked, expand them. If they failed, change course. Sounds obvious today. In 1978, it wasn't. That decision became the foundation of what is now known as China's reform and opening up. Looking back, many historians see it as one of the most important economic turning points of the 20th century. Not because China became rich overnight. Didn't. Not because every problem disappeared. Didn't. But because China stopped asking, "What's the perfect plan?" and started asking, "What's the next step?" That small change in thinking would eventually reshape cities, transform global trade, and quietly become part of your everyday life. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The first major success of China's new strategy didn't happen in Beijing. It didn't happen inside a giant factory. And it certainly didn't begin with skyscrapers. It began in the rice fields. And that unexpected beginning changed everything. History rarely changes overnight. Changes quietly. One decision. One experiment. One opportunity at a time. That was exactly China's approach. Instead of transforming the entire country with one bold reform, its leaders asked a different question. What if we tested new ideas first? If they succeeded, they could be expanded. If they failed, the country could learn and try again. It wasn't a gamble. It was an experiment. And the first experiment didn't begin in a skyscraper. It began in the countryside. The time. Nearly 4 out of every 5 Chinese people lived in rural villages. Most families depended on farming to survive. But for years, hard work didn't always mean a better life. Production was tightly organized, and many farmers had little incentive to grow more than what was required. China needed food, needed higher incomes, most of all, needed hope. So local reforms began giving farming families greater responsibility over their land. After meeting state requirements, they could keep or sell extra crops they produced. Sounded like a small policy change, but its impact was enormous. Fields that had struggled to produce enough food began producing more. Family incomes started to rise. Village markets became busier. For the first time in years, millions of rural families could see that working harder might actually improve their future. The lesson was impossible to ignore. Small changes could produce extraordinary results. That success gave China's leaders confidence to try something even more ambitious. If new ideas could transform farming, could they also transform entire cities? To find the answer, China looked south. Near the border with Hong Kong stood a quiet fishing town called Shenzhen. Few people outside China had ever heard its name. There were no famous skyscrapers, no global technology companies, no international business district, just fishing boats, small roads, and a population of only around 30,000 people. At first glance, it seemed like an unlikely place to change history, but its location made it special. Right next to Hong Kong, one of Asia's busiest trading centers, China saw an opportunity. In 1980, Shenzhen became one of the country's first special economic zones. The idea was simple: allow businesses greater flexibility. Welcome foreign investment, build factories, create jobs, then watch what happened. It was one of the boldest economic experiments of the 20th century. And it worked. Year after year, new factories opened. Construction cranes filled the skyline. Workers arrived from every corner of China, searching for opportunities their hometowns couldn't offer. Money flowed into new businesses. Roads expanded. Ports grew. What had once been a fishing town began transforming into a modern city. Within a single generation, Shenzhen became one of the fastest-growing cities in human history. But perhaps its greatest achievement wasn't its skyline. Proved something far more important. China didn't need to guess its future. Could build it, one successful experiment at a time. And before long, the rest of the world began to notice, because the products leaving those new factories were about to reach homes on every continent. By the late 1980s, China's reforms were no longer just an experiment. They were changing the country itself. Factories appeared where farmland had once stretched for miles. Small towns became busy industrial centers. Millions of people packed their bags, said goodbye to their families, and traveled to growing cities in search of a better life. It became one of the largest migrations in modern history. For many, the work was difficult. The hours were long. The pay was modest. But compared to the opportunities they had left behind, it was a chance to build a different future. Every new worker, every new factory, every new road added another piece to a much bigger picture. The world began to notice. Companies from Japan, Europe, and the United States started moving production to China. First, the reason seemed simple. Labor costs were lower. But that wasn't the whole story. If cheap labor alone created economic miracles, many countries would have followed exactly the same path. China offered something else. Reliability. Imagine you're a company making millions of phones every year. You don't just need a factory. You need glass manufacturers, battery suppliers, chip makers, packaging companies, shipping ports, motorways, railways, and workers trained to keep everything moving on time. China wasn't building one factory. It was building an entire manufacturing ecosystem. Everything worked together. Supplier could deliver parts within hours. Finished products could reach a major port the same day. Cargo ships carried those products across oceans to homes around the world. The system became faster, smarter, and more efficient every year. By the early 2000s, walk into almost any electronics shop, department store, or supermarket, and you'd see the result. Television, made in China. A microwave, made in China. Toy, made in China. Pair of trainers, made in China. Those 3 words were no longer just a label. They had become a symbol of a changing world. Then another major milestone arrived. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, often called the WTO. Joining the WTO gave Chinese businesses broader access to global markets under internationally agreed trade rules. Exports grew rapidly. Foreign investment increased. Trade with the rest of the world expanded. China became more connected to the global economy than ever before. But success created a new challenge. For years, China had become incredibly good at making products designed by other companies. The next question was much harder. Could China become a country that created the world's next great inventions? Because building products and creating the future are 2 very different things. The answer to that question would define China's next chapter. By the beginning of the 21st century, China had already achieved something few countries in history ever had. It had become the world's manufacturing powerhouse. Its ports handled more cargo than almost anywhere else on Earth. Its factories supplied products to nearly every continent. And its economy was growing at a pace that surprised even many experts. But China's leaders understood something important. No country can depend on manufacturing forever. As wages rise, making simple products becomes more expensive. Other countries begin competing for the same factories. Keep growing. You have to move beyond building other people's ideas. You have to create your own. That realization marked the beginning of China's next transformation. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, China invested heavily in education. Universities expanded. Research funding increased. Millions of students graduated in engineering, science, mathematics, and technology. The goal wasn't simply to produce more workers. It was to produce more innovators. The results slowly began to appear. Chinese companies started designing products instead of only assembling them. The country became a global leader in electric vehicle batteries. It invested heavily in renewable energy. Its high-speed rail technology connected cities at remarkable speed. Companies like Huawei, BYD, DJI, and CATL became internationally recognized names in their industries. Label, made in China, was changing. Increasingly, it also meant designed in China. But history has never rewarded countries for standing still. Every success creates a new challenge. Today, China faces an aging population. Birth rates have fallen. Economic growth has slowed compared with the extraordinary pace of earlier decades. The property market has faced major difficulties. And competition with other global powers has become more intense. These challenges are real. How China responds to them will shape the next chapter of its story. Because becoming a global superpower is difficult, remaining one may be even harder. Oh, how did China become a global superpower? It wasn't because of one miracle. It wasn't because of one leader. And it certainly wasn't because of one perfect plan. It happened because China was willing to learn. When something worked, it expanded. When something didn't, it adjusted. That mindset shaped everything that followed. From the rice fields to Shenzhen, from factories to research laboratories, from exporting simple goods to competing in advanced technologies. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took decades, millions of workers, thousands of businesses, countless engineers, teachers, entrepreneurs, and families, all becoming part of a much bigger story. Today, whether you're charging your phone, riding in an electric vehicle, ordering something online, or simply reading the words, "Made in China," you're seeing the result of decisions that began more than 40 years ago. Not decisions that promised instant success, but decisions that embraced patience, experimentation, and constant improvement. Whether China's next 40 years will be as extraordinary as the last, no one can say for certain. But one thing is beyond debate. China didn't just change itself, changed the global economy, and in doing so, changed the daily lives of billions of people, including yours. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more fact-based stories about China's history, culture, economy, and rise on the world stage, subscribe to China Living, because the biggest events in history often begin with the smallest decisions.